Electronic stores around the world, specifically in America, have been a dying breed. One of the largest, Circuit City, met a dramatic and painful end, with even Best Buy struggling on their worst days. At a more regional scale was a beloved retail brand with a very particular level of charm. Their stores dominated California and made a smaller presence in several other states around America. But in early 2021, their long fall from grace finally came to a conclusion when all of their stores were liquidated, shuttered, and now some sitting abandoned. A unique and depressing reality of the quirky brand that was both loved and hated by its customers. What's up, guys? My name is Jake, and in this 73rd episode of Abandoned, let's take a look at how this nearly 40-year-old electronics store brand came crumbling down and left a vast portfolio of abandoned stores in its wake. This is Fry's Electronics. Today's episode of Abandoned is sponsored by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use the code BSF16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 gifts. It's San Francisco, 1954, and 2 brothers named Charles and Donald Fry opened up a small grocery store off a family loan. It was called Fry's Food and Drug and actually grew into a small, somewhat profitable chain. So much so, in fact, that in 1972, they sold the company to Dillon's. The brothers then passed their newly found wealth down the family tree, where Charles's 3 sons had decided to pool their money together and start their own business. Their idea was to open an electronics store from the ever-emerging consumer market, but treat it like the business model of a grocery store. Since, of course, that was the industry they were coming from, and it was an interesting business case, merging the small electronic stores of the time like Radio Shack and the vast selection and space of a supermarket. Fry's Electronics opened their first store in Sunnyvale, California on May 17, 1985. Also similar to grocery stores, Fry's began selling shelf space and using that extra income aside from sales to advertise. The stores also had a small restaurant inside and sold food at a loss as a method to get shoppers through the door, make them happy, hope they buy merchandise, and leave with a good impression. This was a great start for a brand new company, and naturally, expansion was warranted. But on the flip side, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Employees would join their staff often with little to no knowledge of electronics, something that would end up biting them later on. Fry's grew into a new location also in Sunnyvale, and this time making it something unique. The idea, much like Best Products, was to build out their storefronts to look completely different and set them apart. They hired a former designer from Lucasfilm to build out their increasingly audacious themes. Through the 90s, they continued to expand, opening stores across the tech capital of California and theming their stores accordingly. Each store would cost upwards of $1 million to build and had exterior and interior theming elements that were highly detailed. Some giving the appearance of space with space stations around you, others under the sea in Atlantis, and others getting really out there with the Wild West and exploring the fantasy world of Alice in Wonderland. So many more themes were explored through their ever-increasing number of locations. Fry's made the move to acquire the 6-store Incredible Universe chain, which was owned by Tandy, or better known as Radio Shack. They spent around $116 million on the established electronic big box chain, and soon rebranded all of them to Fry's. In doing so, they had now made the jump out of state into Texas, Arizona, and Oregon. Fry's was now becoming a regional brand with a much wider reach than they had just a few years prior. While growth made sense, the unproven markets they were now entering was a bit like driving down a dark road as fast as you can. Without really understanding what's in front of you, there's potential for an accident. By the early 2000s, Fry's was the store most tech nerds liked to visit. It was fun and an enjoyable experience going there, and each store had over 50,000 items to choose from. Through big sales and over holidays, there would often be large lines snaking out front.
There was just something about walking the endless aisles of tech goods, gawking at the ever-evolving products. There was always a component or part for you, and the brand grew a very loyal base of shoppers. There was now 17 across the west coast of America, but now a new potential threat was emerging, in the form of the internet. Fry's spent $8 million acquiring the established online marketplace called Siberian Outpost and renamed it to Outpost.com. Though in 2006, they would launch their own dedicated website with Frys.com. A pretty late start for e-commerce with their own branding. Scandal then plagued the company over the recession, as in 2008, Asaf Umar Siddiqui, the acting VP of Merchandising and Operations, was charged with fraud for conducting what is known as a kickback scheme. He basically overcharged Frys for vendors whom he had made secret deals with on prices. He also overcharged some vendors, all for which he would send to his dummy LLCs to fund his insane gambling habits. But that wasn't the only scandal for executives. In 2012, the company paid $2.3 million to settle a sexual harassment lawsuit where they had allegedly fired a female employee for reporting harassment. Regardless of the bad press, Frys was now opening new stores. By 2014, they had reached their largest number of locations yet, 34 across 9 states. 17 in California, 8 in Texas, 2 in Arizona, another 2 in Georgia, and 1 each in Illinois, Indiana, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. It was certainly a wide reach with a very localized brand presence wherever they operated. Despite this wide reach, the perception Frys had only declined from here. The brand had suffered from almost crippling supply chain issues, leading to shelves inside their stores shockingly empty, which was a pretty stark contrast since some of their stores were over 120,000 square feet. Their longtime practices on how they operated also finally started to catch up with them. As far back as 1997, they were accused of making customers jump through hoops who were just trying to make simple returns. A pretty blatant anti-consumer practice. On top of this, their employees were just not very well versed with customer service or the very products they were instructed to sell. To make matters worse, some were on commission, meaning you often have young, inexperienced employees whose best interest is to sell you something they don't even know anything about. That's not a great business model for customer satisfaction, especially where people's expectations have only increased in modern times. In early 2020, Frys had closed their oldest store in Palo Alto. The dawn of the pandemic was tough for all retailers, but specifically put Frys into a precarious situation. While they were a private company and haven't disclosed financial details and specifics, it can very well be assumed that they were losing money at an alarming pace. Employees around this time were beginning to sound the alarm. Through 2020, the brand announced the closure of several more of their locations, permanently shuttering and liquidating all assets within. This enormous downsizing sparked much speculation on the tumultuous future for the chain. But then, everyone's suspicions had finally been confirmed. On February 24th, 2021, Frys announced they would be liquidating all remaining stores and closing them for good. The company cited the escalating complications in the retail markets and the challenges faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. Soon, all of Frys' electronic stores went into closing liquidation, giving one final chance for lifelong shoppers to say goodbye. For many, it was quite surreal for these highly themed and playful stores to become hollow, disheveled shells of what they once were. By May 2021, the final store had closed its doors, marking the end of Frys Electronics, a 36-year-old company. While the struggles of the pandemic certainly did play a huge part on their ultimate downfall, for anyone who had actually been shopping there prior, the writing was already on the wall. Brick-and-mortar electronics stores in America is a very tough business. We saw how difficult it was for 2 large chains to compete in the same country, and ultimately only one came out alive. But even Best Buy has struggled here or there, fighting for their own survival. Best Buy more or less has the brick-and-mortar electronic market covered, and with the rise of online retailers, competition is extremely fierce. Now, the very quirky nature of Frys' stores is always something I can appreciate, but it came with a lot of caveats. Shelves were nearly empty, their stores were aging, and customer service had left a lot to be desired. Younger generations really had no reason to visit the stores, and through their last decade open, they almost certainly saw and felt the decline of customers. I'd imagine the vast majority of their core repeat shoppers tend to skew older and have a personal connection to the brand's past. Since their closure, many of the locations have either already been developed or are in the process. But there are some locations still left standing completely abandoned. In fact, I visited one of them. It was the store in Burbank, California, the one with the crashed spaceship over the entrance. Despite its closure only being a few months before I filmed this footage, it was a ghostly reminder of the once booming retailer. Others, like in Wilsonville, Oregon, are already visibly abandoned, with boards covering the front doors and windows. Since it's been a rather short time since their bankruptcy, much of the documentation of the remaining locations will likely come in. So it'll be a pretty interesting visual comparison to see what Fry's stores look like abandoned, if of course there are any left. So really, those are going to be the last remaining legacy of Fry's. Or is it? So remember the grocery chain the two brothers sold in the 70s? Well, the company that they sold it to was acquired by Kroger in the early 80s. They decided to keep the brand, and now Fry's Food and Drug has over 120 locations across the state of Arizona. So in some weird way, despite having no formal connection to any of the members of the Fry family, the name still lives on. Quite successfully, in fact, all across Arizona. It even has a similar logo to the electronics store. And if anything, that's their most permanent legacy, and a fitting one too, since that's where it all started from. The only downside of those stores is that you can't shop for bread while a massive ant looks down upon you. What a weird way to end this video. Look, Fry's may be gone forever, but you can still fry up your own meal with this video's sponsor, HelloFresh. I broke out the frying pan for one of the best meals I've had yet from HelloFresh. It's the cheesy chicken and pesto penne, and yes, it was as good as it sounds. If you're lazy like me and you want to make great food but don't have the time or the willpower to make it happen, then HelloFresh just makes sense. They send everything you need pre-portioned, and with their easy-to-follow instructions, you can really make meals you've always wanted to quick and easily. Plus, it's cheaper than buying ingredients you don't even end up using at grocery stores. But above it all, it makes you a better chef, and the quality of food once you're done is legit restaurant quality. I went with the pesto penne because I thought it would be funny with a frying pan joke, but I also had their grilled shrimp and salmon, and it was magnificent.
So if you want to try HelloFresh out for yourself and get some money off, go to HelloFresh.com and use the code BSF16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 gifts.
You can also click the link in the description below. Anyway guys, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.